partners, and I'll talk about that as we go. But obviously, community power, a really big new opportunity for the state, and something I think the Local Energy Solutions Work Group is obviously interested in supporting. So I think we all know sort of generally what community power is. It's a new law that enables local governments, cities, towns, or counties to procure and provide electricity to their residents and businesses. This is sometimes called community choice aggregation or municipal aggregation. And you have the community power program that buys or builds electricity supply in bulk. You have the utility company that delivers that over their transmission and distribution grids and maintaining those poles and wires. And then you have the residents and businesses that are receiving that power on the other end. And really one of the things that we are sort of emphasizing in the way we talk about community power is it is both wholesale procurement, like buying bulk quantities of electricity at wholesale, but also engaging retail customers. That's a really important component that I'll talk more about. And I'm going to just kind of skip through this fairly quickly because I know a lot of you are all familiar. But again, these are not utilities. They coordinate with utilities. The utilities continue to own and operate the grid. A little bit of background on the legislation. This updated an existing statute, RSA 53E, relative to aggregation of electric customers by municipalities and counties. There was a bill last year, 286, signed by the governor, effective as of October 2019. And there's a lot of innovative things in there that go beyond some of the other states, such as, for example, the ability for community power programs to implement their own electricity metering. And then sort of, again, the broad definition is both the supply of electric power, but also things like demand side management, conservation, metering, meter reading, and other innovations.
Henry, is there any legislative risk where the future legislature could say, well, we really don't like community power that much and we're going to stop it?
I think there's always that risk. There'd have to be like a pretty big change in, I think, the political climate and the perspective, because this was pretty bipartisan and supported by a lot of different parties. So, I mean, if there was a really dramatic failure of a program for some reason where like it costs people a lot of money or something like that, then potentially. But I think we're a little far. We're so early in the implementation stage that that's not a large consideration.
In general, no legislature can bind the hands of a future legislature. So everything that's been put in statute can be clawed back.
Yeah, that's the nature of policy, I guess. So I'm gonna, again, this is kind of background stuff before we get to the more interesting stuff, but you know, talking to all the communities out there that want to do this, they have a lot of different goals. Those goals include just basic choice, local control over deciding where their energy comes from, a lot of opportunity to control and manage energy costs, a lot of opportunity to procure renewable energy or meet decarbonization goals, or actually really build new renewables, which is something else that I'll talk about, as opposed to purchasing RECs. And then there's kind of the local competitive markets. This is all the innovative kind of demand side management, integrating distributed energy resources type things with price signals, and then potential for resiliency in critical facilities as well. And again, just kind of emphasizing that like this is new, like the ability for a bounded geographic community to bulk purchase its electricity and manage that is very different from traditional energy procurement. And there's a lot of potential to use this new opportunity alongside all the other new innovations in energy markets that we're seeing with distributed energy, distributed generation, increasing funding for efficiency, et cetera. So that's kind of the background. Any questions on the background before I talk about CPNH? All right, I'm just going to chug along. So Community Power New Hampshire, CPNH, is in process of formation, I will say. So there's a typo here, but we'll talk about that. So what is CPNH? This is a coalition of municipal and county governments that are coordinating to create a pathway to implementation that is accessible to all New Hampshire cities, towns, and counties. So I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So if you're eating lunch, just maybe consider muting yourself. CPNH, this sort of steering committee, quote unquote, that's working towards CPNH includes these 3 towns, Bristol, Harrisville, and Hanover, along with the city of Lebanon, the city of Nashua, and then Cheshire County, supported by Monadnock Sustainability Hub. So Mary Ewell's on the phone, and we've been working closely with Dory Drockman, Dartmouth College, some aggregation expertise, Clean Energy New Hampshire, and some planning commission partners. And I'm going to talk about what this group has been working on. So the idea behind CPNH is that local governments would work together to form a new locally governed legal entity or public power entity to be the service provider to enable community power programs, sort of a shared back office available to any and all community power programs that would choose to use that. And then the other goal would be support the individual community power programs to get off the ground, develop their programs, and then participate in the shared back office if they so choose. So this slide's a little backgroundy, but again, sort of reiterating the point of community power is both wholesale, like leveraging the ability to engage in competitive wholesale electricity markets, and then that power is delivered by the utility companies, and then leverage competition in retail energy markets as well by integrating the innovations associated with distributed generation and the potential for time-based pricing. So that's one of the potential components of community power in New Hampshire. So again, these 2 services, like what does CPNH actually do? CPNH would competitively enlist expert service providers to do wholesale energy procurements and energy portfolio management. So I'm going to pause on this slide for a minute because I think there's a lot of potential educational opportunity in this slide. So I hope folks will have questions, but Community Power New Hampshire would hire companies to register in the wholesale market and then compile a portfolio of different energy contracts and resources in bulk on behalf of different community power programs. And this is sort of an illustrative example of what an energy portfolio might look like. And this is an important distinction between the traditional approach to municipal aggregation, where a community just buys one fixed price 12-month contract, as opposed to sort of actively managing a portfolio of different products and participating in wholesale markets. So there's a lot of learning I've done on this particular subject and like sort of the companies that do this. And I'm yeah, do folks have questions? Do folks want to jump in and comment about wholesale energy portfolio management? Seek clarification.
Let's say a community wants to do time of use pricing, but the meters associated with that are all dumb meters that can't do that. How would they finance, and how would the distribution utilities be involved with upgrading dumb meters to smart meters?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So there's a couple of ways I think that could work. One could be, there are a number of different price signals, but one of the price signals is this capacity charge. So this blue top right corner of the pie chart here, when you're buying energy, you're buying the energy cost, which is the wholesale price of electricity, but you're also paying for capacity, which is the single hour of peak demand for the year, which is like 8% of your total cost. So there's this enormous price signal associated with the 1 hourly peak that happens in the summer, and community power programs can be exposed to that and then, do demand response to shave that annual peak and reduce that capacity charge in aggregate. So that's one way. And then the other way, there are companies like, I guess I won't throw any names around, but there are companies that do already work with large municipal customers or commercial customers to connect them directly to the real-time wholesale price of electricity. And you have to install your own meters, and so that there is the question about what is the relationship between the community power program and CP&H and the utility in terms of metering is a good one. And that's a bridge I think will have to be crossed once programs are up and running and have are sort of working towards that. All right, like let's use smart metering infrastructure to make these programs more cost effective. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, Andy, but
it sounds like to be determined. And maybe a case could be made that in New Hampshire Electric Co-op territory it might be in some ways better spot for doing community power because they all have smart meters.
Yeah, Unitil as well.
Are you sure about that?
But it's also, yeah, Unitil has AMI, advanced metering infrastructure.
All of its
We have
customers.
AMI, Unitil has AMI installed throughout our electric territory. Certain customers are enabled with real-time data access, and more will be unrolled. More access to real-time data access will be given in time.
So I'm just going to sort of talk through this pie chart real quickly. So like when you're buying electricity, part of the point of community power is to sort of unpack what you're actually purchasing and like lift the hood, so to speak. So you're buying capacity, maybe your portfolio would include a 12-month contract with a supplier at this price. Maybe you're a community that wants to buy some hydro and renewables and you have a separate contract with that generator. Maybe you want to enter into a long-term power purchase agreement with solar or solar plus storage, and you can blend that into your portfolio alongside your other contracts. Maybe some portion of that energy portfolio is just whatever the wholesale market price is at that time, which has been incredibly cheap recently. And then maybe you want to buy some RECs, maybe there's some overhead for risk, and then there's this sliver at the top is margin. So when you buy energy from a broker, right, they pad the rate. They say, okay, we can get you this deal at 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and we're going to take 0.1 cent a kilowatt hour, and that's our business model, or something along those lines. So in the CP&H model, the CP&H kind of becomes your broker, right? And then to the degree that there is margin between buying cheap wholesale electricity in bulk, covering your administrative costs, and then turning around and selling marked up retail power, individual community power programs can have final rate making authority. They decide what the retail rate is. So they can choose, if there's margin in there, do we want to just get the lowest possible rate for our customers? Or do we want to take that little bit of a padded rate the way a broker would and allocate that towards a reserve fund or allocate that towards some other local program or energy resource investment? So there's potential to capture this margin between wholesale and retail electricity costs. I'm going to talk about that on another slide, but does anyone have questions about that? Okay, I'm going to move along. So this is, again, this is kind of the one side of the picture. You buy bulk electricity, and there's a lot that goes into that. You hire a company that does it, but it's just purchasing bulk electricity. On the other side of the equation is this retail market, right? So in addition to wholesale energy procurement, CP&H can collaborate with individual community power programs on retail customer engagement strategies. So obviously a community power program has to notify all of its residents and businesses and say, hey, you're now getting electricity through us. Here's your opt-out, check the box. Maybe there's a website or billing functions associated with that. And then there's this sort of universe of potential retail customer engagement that could be associated with a community power program to increase its value to the community, whether that be energy efficiency and conservation, coordinating with the utility program administrators on how do we want to market and implement those programs, weatherize campaigns, kind of a thing. There's the potential to do different rate designs for that supply portion of the bill and that real-time pricing thing that Andy mentioned. So potential for that. And then any other sort of demand response or load flexibility, like how can the community power program, through its energy committee that's gotten all this public input on designing the plan, then turn around and continue to engage their community in a way that will be connected to and beneficial to the community power program. Questions about these kind of the two sides? There's like buy bulk electricity, and then there's the use your community power program to engage your community and deploy local resources and markets.
Henry, if you're going to be doing these other beneficial programs for your customers, it seems like you would have to have some kind of budget built in. So you would have to be able to pad your program in some way. Am I seeing this in a realistic vision that, you know, to have these kind of, you know, the energy efficiency or, you know, these other services, you're envisioning maybe some kind of padding and some kind of build out?
It's a great question. So the decision-making authority on that question lies with the community. So however you write your community power plan, if you write it to say, we want the cheapest electricity possible for all of our residents and businesses, then that's the priority for that community, and that's what they'll do. And they'll just sort of focus on purchasing, like minimizing any administrative cost. If the community has other goals like renewable energy or local market development or whatnot, they could choose to mark up that power, pad the rate the way the broker would, and then reinvest that into these programs, which actually then kind of turn around and reduce costs. So for example, if you're investing in a program that shaves your annual capacity peak or reduces other time-based costs, then that's actually going to reduce your costs on the other end. So it's kind of this funny question of like, we've had a competitive wholesale market for a while. We have legislation that says we should have competition in retail electricity markets, but we have sort of very limited competition. But there's this potential to connect the two things. Like the way we consume electricity right now has no relationship to price signals. And like you can connect those two things. And this is an opportunity to think in a more modern way about how do we engage our communities to adopt technologies or behavior changes to reduce electricity costs?
Yeah, so I can see that capacity being one that people could do even without a smart meter, right? That's what you're saying. So
right. You just send a text message to everyone in your community twice a year and say, hey, like it's forecasted to be the peak tomorrow, like maybe use less electricity and your community power program will be cheaper. Or you do 100 hot water heaters in 100 homes that only charge at night, or one of the millions of other examples of how you could shift load, but we don't really shift load because there aren't price signals. So,
okay. Yeah. Got it.
Great questions, Mary. What do you have other questions?
Not right now. I mean, you know, I'm beginning to get this. I'm sure I'll have more.
Great. Yeah. So again, like in concept, so I also want to be like very clear, like this is a group that has been meeting for a couple of months that is working towards the establishment of this sort of new entity that will be the service vehicle. And it is not established yet. Like I'm putting together a website this week with this group. We have like some action items and some to-dos and some deadlines, but like we're very much in the like we're in the beginning end of this, and part of the strategy is engage and communicate this information and this idea to a lot of different energy committees and municipal staff and officials, which we have been doing. I've given this presentation to a lot of cities and towns. And then like bring them in on the sort of like design of the governance. So this is kind of the outline of what the organizational chart would look like, but you'd have individual community power programs with their individual committees, And those would be the members of CPNH that would have an appointee on a governance board that would be sort of the oversight, the decision makers of the organization, like a board of directors. There's some limited number of internal staff, again, like in this theoretical future where we've actually set this thing up. And then there is a competitive solicitation to hire the company that goes and registers in the ISO New England wholesale market and manages a portfolio of energy contracts. And potentially other subcontractors, for example, to do customer service. Questions? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So again, this question of revenue and cost sharing, because the question nobody's asked yet, but which is I get every time I do this presentation and is a really good question, is how much does it cost and what's the administrative cost? So yes, like there will have to be an administrative cost associated with the back office that does active energy portfolio management and customer services. And the idea is share that cost fairly among all participating community power programs. So an open question is there a buy-in for each participating community power program for a membership for some fixed cost price, or is the program able to self-finance by purchasing power at wholesale, marketing it up the way the broker would, and then selling power at retail? So in concept, CPNH would purchase this wholesale power, allocate funds to cover its operating and financing costs, and then sell power to participating community power customers according to the rates that that individual community power program has set in the portfolio that they have chosen. And then again, we talked a little bit about this, but each individual community power program, they've got rate setting authority. They choose what the final price is, whether it's 7.5 cents or 8 cents or 8.5 cents. And depending on how they make those decisions, they can allow for surplus revenue to be allocated towards the rate decrease, the reserve fund, or any of that retail market development type stuff, meters, distributed generation, et cetera, load shifting. And then sort of back to process, to form a community power program, governing body creates a committee or designates a committee as the community power committee. That committee develops an aggregation plan, which can be done in partnership with CPNH or planning commissions or a consultant or a broker or whoever. The legislative body, town meeting vote, city council vote, county commission vote has to approve that plan. And then all residents and businesses have to be notified. And sort of our timelines within this group of communities, obviously governance is one. So actually create this service vehicle through a joint action agreement under this RSA that allows for that. And then we're actively engaged in the regulatory process. Clifton Delo, Assistant Mayor, City of Lebanon, is part of this group, and he actually wrote the law, and then he wrote the draft rules for the regulators for a meeting last month. So we're engaged in the regulatory process. And then there's the community engagement bucket, which is kind of do this presentation for a lot of communities and then bring them in and have them participate in the design of this thing. And then be prepared to issue a competitive solicitation to an educated vendor community. And then the medium-term objective is late 2020 or early 2021 through the establishment of Community Power New Hampshire, enable launch of participating community power programs and future community power programs. And we have a save the date, which we have begun to market to municipal staff, officials, and local energy committees for a community power summit Friday, June 5th, where we'll sort of have a workshop to do a lot of that community engagement and education and sort of like try to expand this small circle of communities that have buy-in and ownership over this idea to a broader circle of communities that want to participate in this. So we're in the process of organizing a virtual online format for that. And it's another test on, okay, how can we be engaging and productive and really leverage the things you can do with virtual meetings in an effective way. And that's the end of this slide deck, but happy to have open up a discussion with this group if folks have questions or comments.
I guess I do have one additional question. If you have like a, I mean, I could envision that you're going to have different towns and communities with vastly different visions of what they want to do with their portfolios, and with really vastly different resources and sizes of the town. So I could think that there might be a town that really just wants to have the lowest prices and might want to actually pay a fee to be part of the structure. And then I could see another town, or maybe even a larger, like a small city, that would want to pad and then maybe, build more renewables, or, do something more expansive. And as you're thinking about this, are you trying to build a structure that would have space for kind of both of those scenarios?
That's a really good question, Mary. I'm glad you asked that. Yes. So in the idea is that the CP&H, this is just an entity to purchase power according to the program set up by different community power programs. So there is one bulk portfolio that is sort of the amalgamation of all of the different community power procurements. And there's an economies of scale in that is beneficial. But then each individual, say like the town of Peterborough has Peterborough Community Power, and they have their plan, and it's just cheapest electricity we can get. Doesn't matter how much, if there's any green in that. They can get that portfolio through CP&H or through some other broker. And that's their own sort of sub-portfolio of the larger procurement. And then say there's another community that Hanover wants to prioritize renewables, they'll have a separate rate for Hanover Community Power that's maybe a little bit more expensive, and a separate sub-portfolio that has a higher percentage renewables. So it is a good question. And I think maybe we need to be better at communicating, like this is not one bulk procurement for everybody. This is sub programs that are organized through one shared back office, shared portfolio manager. Many different accounts with one stock portfolio manager kind of thing.
I've also seen with aggregated power that in Massachusetts, that even within some of these larger municipalities, that they actually have choice for the residents, where they can purchase a different level of power. Do you envision that or not?
Right. Any individual community power program can choose to have sort of their baseline rate for everyone, and then an opt-up, say, to, hey, pay a little bit of a premium and you get 50% renewables, or something of that nature. So yes, individual communities can design their programs to allow for optionality within that. The kind of general rule of thumb is you need to do these programs on an opt-out basis, because if you do opt-out programs, you won't get less than 95% participation. If you do opt-in programs, you won't get more than 5% participation. So similarly, if you have an opt-up from the baseline to 100% renewables, you'll probably only get 5% of your community doing that, but you could have that as an option.
Okay, thanks.
Good questions.